A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, with so much happening in the Middle East, it's hard to keep abreast of the major developments, let alone be across all the details. Well, an opportunity today to hear from an advisor and consultant in international law. He works with the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation and is part of a global network of international law academics. Andrew Tucker is the co-author of the book Israel on Trial and Two States for Two Peoples. Andrew's based in the Netherlands and joining us. Hello, Andrew. Welcome along to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Good to be back with you.
Andrew, it's hard to get a grip because things are so complex that are going on in the Middle East right now. What comes to mind for you as we talk about the explosive situations that surround the nation of Israel?
Well, really, there are two things, Neil. One is on the ground. Everything around Israel is completely in flux and shifting and moving. Israel is actually fighting a war on more than 7 fronts, which kind of was triggered by the 7th of October last year, the attack of Hamas on Israel. Since then, Israel's been fighting in Gaza, it's fighting against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and now we have Syria collapsing on Israel's doorstep. So a very potent mix of highly threatening and dangerous developments for Israel on the ground. And at the same time, Israel's fighting a war in the international courts, here in The Hague with the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. Lots of things going on. And these are also highly existential threats to Israel. So it's I think I would call that the 8th front that Israel is fighting a war on.
It's a lawfare front, and interestingly, I'll get your impression here because Israel appears to be held to a different standard from all of these other groups that are attacking Israel. This different standard is where you come in because as an international lawyer, you're trying to get your head around and make the argument in favour of Israel.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we're all looking for peace and for a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But what we see is the international community wanting to impose on Israel the creation of a Palestinian state. And we think this is highly problematic, not only because it's a kind of twisted legal narrative, but we think that creating a new, which would be an Islamic hostile state on Israel's doorstep is going to really threaten Israel's existence. And we think that's unacceptable.
Let's talk about law, international law, the International Court of Justice. As you say, an 8th front, it's a lawfare battle for the state of Israel. What do you understand about the genocide cases that have been brought against Israel? Because some will say they're just defending themselves. Of course, the enemies of Israel think this is genocide. How do you approach that?
Oh, look, these genocide cases are being driven by very hostile states. It's pretty clear Iran is behind all of this. They approached and financed South Africa to bring a genocide case against Israel. Other states have joined. They're all states which are either Islamic or highly Marxist states, which are very deeply hostile to Israel. And the whole genocide thing is a complete phony because the reality is that Israel is defending itself, as you said, in a war against jihad entities like Hamas, like Hezbollah, which themselves have a genocidal intent, a genocidal campaign. They exist in order to destroy the Zionist entity and the Jewish people. So ever since 7th of October, Israel is fighting to eliminate that threat. That's a legitimate right that states have of self-defense. And there's a lot that can be said about that that defensive war that Israel is fighting. Perhaps it's using excessive force in certain situations. That's quite possible. But genocide is it's known as the crime of crimes. It's the worst possible accusation you could make against a state. And it requires proof that Israel intends to destroy the Palestinians as a people in whole or in parts. And there's no way, in my view, and the view of actually many others, that you could prove that Israel is intending to actually remove the existence of the Palestinian people. I mean, Israel's doing everything it can to make sure that civilians in Gaza are protected. Despite the numbers, I know the optics are not good. It looks pretty bad. But let's not forget Israel's fighting against Hamas, which is buried deeply in tunnels in the Gaza Strip. And the only way to defeat Hamas and to get the hostages back, let's not forget there's still 100 hostages kept underground in Gaza, is to cause massive destruction of buildings. And that's why we see all these terrible images on our screens. But this is not genocide, Neil, at all. And we have to fight hard to push back against this absurd claim. Amnesty International has just come out with a report claiming it's genocide. This is totally unacceptable.
Let me ask you, because I don't often get to ask international lawyers about these things, but when we're talking about the courts, we're talking about weaponized instruments, politicized instruments in these cases. You've got the International Court of Justice, and then you've got the International Criminal Court. Genocide claimed in one, and then another one, the International Criminal Court, has issued warrants for arrest against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. What's your take on the warrants that have been issued?
Well, that's another. It's all part of the same campaign, Neil, and it's quite extraordinary that this court is seeking to arrest the political leaders of a state, a state that is built on the rule of law and that is not even a member of the International Criminal Court, for war crimes. In a situation which Israel is defending itself, there's a lot of very weak elements about these arrest warrants. One of them is that the court simply doesn't have jurisdiction because they're claiming that Palestine is a state and that Israel's committing crimes on the territory of this state of Palestine. But the fact is Palestine is not a state. It could have been. It could have been the Singapore of the Middle East with all the money that the West has poured into the Palestinian institutions, but they have not created a state. They've created a terror network that is threatening Israel. And to elevate it to a position of statehood, I think is playing into the hands of the enemies of Western democratic liberal values. And the court has allowed itself to be captured by these interests. That's one side. And there's very little evidence. A lot of this is based on the claim that that Netanyahu and Gallant authorized a campaign to starve the Palestinians, right? To kill Palestinians by starvation, which is a war crime. A crime against humanity, and this is highly dubious. They're relying on the numbers that are issued by the Gaza Health Authority, which is a Hamas entity, which creates all these fictitious numbers of civilians killed in the Gaza Strip. They overlook Israel's efforts to ensure that the Palestinians are receiving humanitarian help in a very complex situation. So I think it's a very dubious kind of enterprise that this prosecutor has, and the court has allowed itself to go along with this.
Andrew, while we're talking about weaponised international courts, bring into the mix the United Nations and the calls that are there upon the nation of Israel to withdraw all its citizens and military from East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip. Is there strength in those numbers from the United Nations? Where does Israel sit in all of that as an international lawyer? What would you argue on behalf of the nation of Israel?
Well, we have been arguing in this case. We've been assisting the Republic of Fiji in the International Court of Justice, which has been putting the case not just for Israel, but I think for the international legal system. So this is the third prong, really, of this legal campaign. We have the International Criminal Court, we have the genocide cases in the ICJ, the Court of Justice, and then the third was an advisory opinion that the Palestinians asked for through the General Assembly. The court, after a very one-sided set of hearings, came out with a ruling or an opinion that Israeli presence in the so-called occupied territories is illegal. And that opinion has now gone back into the General Assembly, which has called for Israel to remove its civilians and military by September next year, 2025, which is totally absurd when you think Israel is being asked to commit suicide here, to give up these territories, which it has a strong legal claim to, and to allow these territories to be taken over by Hamas and other terrorist entities. That's exactly what is being asked of Israel here. And Israel, of course, cannot and will not comply with this demand of the General Assembly. So we're in for I think a kind of a clash here. This will, I think, inevitably be elevated to the Security Council. And so we'll have to see how it plays out. I think with the new presidency coming in the United States in January, Israel probably has a strong ally in the Security Council. But the rest of the world is against Israel on this one, with the exception of a few states like Fiji, unfortunately not Australia, in demanding the creation of a Palestinian state, which is, on the mountains of Judea and Samaria and in East Jerusalem. They want East Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, to be the capital of an Islamic Palestinian state. And that's what the government of Australia is also supporting. So we have to understand what's at stake here. Christians and Jews will have no access or limited access to the holy places, to the Temple Mount. We're setting ourselves up for a very highly combustible situation on the ground.
Well, the tensions are not likely to subside anytime soon. Andrew Tucker, we're talking to you today from the Netherlands. You're about to get on a plane and fly to Australia. You're going to be speaking to a gathering which is organised in Melbourne on the 18th of December, talking Israel and international law. There might be listeners who'd be a part of that. It's going to be in Camberwell in Victoria, but the specific location will be made known on registration. So I'll point listeners to Thinc, T-H-I-N-C. That stands for the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, thinc-israel.org. That's think-israel.org. And you could also visit the website of Christians for Israel, C4ISRAEL, c4israel.org. Andrew Tucker, thanks so much for updating us today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Pleasure to be with you as usual.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.